was going to happen eventually.
I was going to. I was going to say it's been happening to me for years. So.
Yeah, we should get t-shirts then. That's good.
The meeting of the Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency to order. We have roll call. We show that all the active members except Mr. Saylor are present. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I don't know if Mr. Saylor's coming or not today. I haven't heard.
I saw him at noon at 11.
Okay.
We're looking at the agenda. Is there any modifications to the agenda? Seeing none, we have approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Public comment. Have no public comment cards. We're going
public.
to adjourn to closed session. We're going to stay in this room at this time. We'll lock ourselves in and turn the microphones off.
Okay.
So, whoops,
Here comes my call, City Manager.
he can come in. Yeah.
I'm going to go tell Paul that it's in here.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, we have just concluded our closed session, returning to our normal agenda, and there's no reportable action at this time. Thank you. So we move on to the consent items. Item 2, the approval of the regular meeting minutes and the treasurer's quarterly report, third quarter. Are there any questions?
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Operations report.
Good afternoon. We have two quick reports. The general manager report, I will do that, and then I will turn it over to Stan to do the operations report. Kind of three main topics to go over today. We have an update on the grants and loans, where we are with respect to those, an update on the joint intake completion project, and also where we are at regarding supplemental water supply. In terms of grant funding, we are nearly complete with grant funding on the joint intake. The agency has received $40.2 million, $21.1 million each from the federal and state respective grants. We are awaiting the final. It's actually 264, not 246,000. There's one more grant reimbursement we are waiting for from Bureau of Reclamation. We've learned fairly recently that they have changed their practices on reimbursement. It now has to be approved in Washington, D.C., not locally, and they don't yet have worked out how they exactly make that happen. So we are projecting that we'll receive that by Q3. It may be optimistic, I don't know. But that will complete the grant funding on that project as soon as we receive that money.
We have to go there and beg.
Potentially.
We're used to it. Our knees are well worn.
Yes. On the loan side of things, so both City of Woodland and City of Davis and UC Davis also had SRF loans, or all had SRF loans. We are basically now nearly complete with the SRF package. The state has done their final inspection of our facilities. The only thing that's outstanding is the submittal of the final report. That was held up for quite some time due to one missing environmental report. Somehow in 2 years of construction, one quarterly report got deleted. So we worked that out with the state, and now we're clear to go ahead and finalize that report. They will then in turn send us a letter saying you've completed all your obligations. Thank you. In terms of final loan amounts, this is actually a really good story that we should always continue to mention. So these are actually the final amounts in the loan. Woodland's final loan amount is $103.3 million. The authorized amount was $111.5 million. So we came in $11.2 million or so under what was authorized. On the Davis loan, the final loan amount was $89.4 million. The authorized amount was right around $95.5 million. So Davis came in also 6.1 or so under authorized amount as well. So overall, we came in roughly 14.3 million under what was authorized. So in a large project, that's a really good story that we should make sure we tell everybody. So we do have the final amortization schedules now, and that's what's reflected in the budget today.
Yeah.
Joint intake construction project. Construction is going well. The canal side work, this is the canal side work for RD 2035. Conaway Ranch discharges their irrigation water. All of the canal side work has been completed, including all the riprap. The only thing that has not been completed is the hydro seeding, and that's the seed fertilizer mix. If they were to place that now, it would not survive until fall. So we'll do that later on in the year when it has a better chance of actually getting rained on and then growing. The contractor did meet the early incentive payment condition that we had, and if you recall, we had a $50,000 bonus for the contractor if they got in winter months and completed work ahead of April 15th, before Conaway wanted to start doing the irrigation work. That was put into the contract because working on the Sacramento River levee system, working with their irrigation system, and all the environmental constraints we had regarding to giant garter snake hibernation season, fish spawning season, flood control season, and everything else, it was just too complicated regarding when you can and cannot work in this area. So the thought was, if we can get the contractor in, do the canal side work, have that operational for Conaway when they needed the water, that removes a big variable affecting the rest of the work. So the contractor was able to get in and get that work done, and they did meet the bonus incentive. On the Riverside work, they've made a lot of progress since the last board meeting. The conduit work has been completed. The side through the middle of the road, essentially towards the canal side, has been grouted full of concrete. That work has been done. The Riverside has been removed. The levee's been deconstructed and rebuilt. riprap has been installed on the Riverside levee, so it looks like a nice brand new levee, and I have a few pictures coming up of that. Electrical conduit from the well shed back to the joint intake has been done. The status of the road today is the aggregate base placement has been completed, so the road is essentially ready to pave. The egg base is done. They probably will do one more fine grading right before paving. Asphalt paving is scheduled for July 5 and 6. That date might slip a day here or there, but it's only next week, so they probably will stick to that date. So it's 2 days of paving. They'll shut down one half of the road, pave that half, shift to the other half, pave that half, come back the next day and do the second lift on both sides, and then they'll be done. The other thing that we did work out with the railroad is exactly what the paving limits are and what the arrangements are with that. Our project includes now paving to 7 feet from the center line of the railroad tracks, and that's roughly 2 feet outside of the railroad ties. The railroad company will come back in later. They want to replace some railroad ties on their own cost, at their own expense. The agency is not participating in that. And I believe they also wanted to do some work on the rails themselves. Again, we are not participating in that. They are, however, asking that the agency pays for the cost of the asphalt paving around their tracks themselves, and also plating over temporarily while they're doing the paving work. And we agreed to that. It's a low dollar amount, I think less than $10,000. From our perspective, our contractor's perspective, we do not want to be trying to pave on their railroad tracks. So it makes a lot of sense. Let them do it. We'll pay them. We have not yet got the itemized costs for that. As soon as we get that, we'll review it, and if we think items are too high, we will go back and coordinate with them on that.
What is cellular concrete?
Cellular concrete is it's kind of like grout that has an additive at it that makes it really full of bubbles, essentially. And so it's very lightweight. I believe the unit weight is slightly less than water even. So it's a very, very lightweight. It's almost kind of like styrofoam, but in concrete.
Would it float in water?
Yes.
Like pumice almost.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's used in the levee because we needed to make sure that we filled in every single piece of the every single piece of the inside of the conduit, so we don't have a path for water to flow through that thing in the long run. So I have a few pictures of the project, both canal side and riverside work. This is the canal side work. The picture on the left is from the edge of the joint intake. On the left-hand side, looking back towards the road on the right-hand side, it looks like they're smoothing out the embankment a little bit. And on the right-hand side is the RD 2035 canal. You can see we've done a lot of work shaping the canal. The new levee has been built there, and we did put a lot of riprap around that slope. That's one of the things that was changed from the original plans is we did add a fair amount of additional riprap on both the canal side and the riverside due to comments from RD 2035 on the canal side and RD 1600 on the riverside to make sure we don't have erosion. This is the riverside, a couple of pictures from the riverside work. The picture on the left is where we had deconstructed the levee. The conduit is only, I think it was like 5 feet by 5 feet or something, but we ended up having to excavate a much larger area, and that's to make sure that as the levee is rebuilt correctly and knits together with the adjacent soils so that the levee functions as a solid unit going forward. The picture on the right does show where the conduit was. You can see in the concrete there's an opening, and that's where the conduit was. One thing we found a 110-year-old wall. That's the wall we found. Nobody knew it was there. The state had no record of it, so we did have to pay to remove that wall.
Well, would that wall be helpful in the levee?
No, it's actually detrimental to the levee. We talked with the state about it. What they initially said is they said we can talk about this for about a week and get back to you if you have to remove it. We were paying for the equipment because it's a changed condition. We were then on the hook to pay for the equipment to be there. The cost ended up being equal, so we directed the contractor to remove it. But the urban levee design criteria specifies that you can't have things like that in a levee because there's a potential the water could get to it and then get around it. It's basically a potential failure mode within the levee, either for a slip failure into the river or for water to pipe through the levee to the other side. So we knew they were going to come back and tell us to remove it anyways, so we just had it removed. A couple of pictures on the riverside, a little bit more on the riverside road. County Road 117, that's on the left-hand side. I don't know how well it shows up, but look, it's final graded road. The AB has all been placed and it's ready to pave at this point. The picture to the right is the kind of large amount of riprap that was placed to protect the levee from the Sacramento River.
You know, I just have to ask,
I always thought in modern levee construction, you always tried to have some kind of core to protect the levee, and you built around the core. So I still don't understand how cement makes the levee vulnerable.
I think if it had been continuous, maybe it would be different, but this wall was only 10 feet on each side of that old conduit.
Okay.
So it was kind of, and it didn't go all the way down, it was kind of just floating essentially, kind of in the middle of the levee.
No foundation.
No, it was just a wall next to the pipe.
So now you're talking, I understand slipping, then.
Yep. So we do have a fair number of change orders on this project. We're up to 12, which is a little bit concerning given that the facilities are 2 years old in the neighborhood other than the old intake. A couple of them are relatively straightforward. Some of them are actually negative in terms of dollars. One of the first ones we had was installation of a bladder dam and canal dewatering. This was a changed condition. The canal was full of water when the project was bid. When the canal was dewatered, they found that the slope of the canal for quite a ways upstream all sloped back to the intake. In order to do the work, the contractor was required to keep that work area completely dry. So they had a couple of issues. So we actually kind of split the cost with them on that one to help make sure the work got done in time to meet the April 15th deadline. And it was a different condition that wasn't knowable at the time of bidding. We did find some sediment in the conduit. That was something that couldn't be found until the river got low enough and we could see that there was 6 inches of sediment in there. We had to pay them to remove that. Keyway at the toe of the fill slope, that was done to help anchor the new levee fill material into the existing. That was a Central Valley Flood Protection Board requirement. Significant additional riprap on the canal slope, and that was comments both from RD 1600, Kent Lang, and also RD 2035 to make sure that both sides of the levee are protected from erosion from either the Sacramento River or the canal. And most of the rest of these are pretty small. Some of them are actually negative dollar amounts. So, have any other questions on the change orders so far? We have three pay applications that we've approved so far in this project, a total of about $510,000, about 40% or so of the contract. Like I said, they're getting close to paving, and once that, the rest of the finish up work, like there's some fencing they have to do, guardrail installation, that type of work tends to go pretty quickly, and we are projecting that it will be completed right around the end of August, which is a bit ahead of schedule.
Wonderful.
One more slide on my update. Supplemental water supply. So I think you all know that Term 91 did start in June 1. It is unknown at this time and really unknowable as to when that date will actually end. But we are in touch with our neighbors and kind of the water community as a whole. And the thinking of the group is that it will go quite late this year, thinking that it will probably go to right around October 31. So, and Stan will talk about this a little bit more detail, but basically the way the cities are looking at this is that we're planning to make sure that our 10,000 acre feet is available through October 31. And the plant is operating accordingly. We are in discussions with 2 agencies on supplemental water purchase for months beginning November 1 and later. One of them is a little bit further ahead than the other. What we're looking to do is do kind of an options contract where we would buy an options contract to reserve some water, and that we would exercise and pay for the water only if we needed it when Term 91 is lasting past October 31. So both of the agencies that we're working with understand that that's our goal, and we were working towards the goal. We've had a few meetings so far, and it's been positive with one of them at least, and we have another meeting scheduled in the later part of July. We did approve. So the budget that's up next does not have money in there for a formal contract. However, we did add budget for doing some studies. With us as the purchaser of this water right, we've realized that there's a couple of things that need to happen. There has to be a CEQA document prepared, which would be an amendment to the agency's EIR, basically for changing the point of diversion from whoever we're purchasing the water from to our intake. There has to be a CEQA document for that. Also, there needs to be an analysis prepared on how the whole system operates from Sacramento River to the Delta to whoever we're buying it from, how it works from their sending the water to us to our facility and how that impacts the overall river system. And that all gets fed into a division of water rights permit amendment. So we added some budget in there for these studies. One of these agencies were far enough along that we think that we may get started on this in the next month or so.
Any questions of Tim before we go over to the others? Tim, I have a question with regards to communication with the landowners. If you might address that. We've had comments throughout this project by the Langs and other people that are ranchers north of and I know in this paving project, I'm sure you communicated with them. Maybe you could verify that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our construction management team has been working with the property owners to the north, and that's partly why everybody's been pushing to have paving done next week. There is some crop that gets harvested in later part of July, and I don't know which one it is, but the plan was to get the paving work completed prior to that happening and prior to them hauling a lot of trucks through that road again. So the road will be open through paving, and as people come by, they stop and talk to our construction team. So they do know that we're doing the work, and they do know that paving will be occurring next week.
And the second piece, my question, is that we had several comments from Supervisor Chamberlain as we went through this project, and I was wondering if the county has been kept appraised and Mr. Chamberlain has been kept appraised of the progress.
I haven't talked to Mr. Chamberlain myself, but we have been working with the county transportation crew. We met with the railroad 2 weeks ago. County staff were there. County staff met with our team setting the paving limits a few weeks before that. So it's all been worked out. We're fully in agreement with the county on exactly what the extents are for paving.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, this is somewhat off to the side, but Sacramento City Councilman Jeff Harris had a piece in today's B on the editorial page in support of the Sites Reservoir, and it mentioned he was part of some Sites Reservoir working group, which I'd never heard of, and I had a question of you as to what is the interest of the city of Sacramento in the Sites Reservoir? Is it an official one or a personal one from him? And the second one is, does Sites Reservoir have any potential impact on the implementation of Term 91 in future years after it's online? Will it help relieve this annual problem of having our water essentially cut off?
Yeah, we did. I don't know the cities of Sacramento's interest, but we actually are meeting with him. He's coming to take a tour of Woodland's ASR wells in a few weeks, because the city of Sacramento apparently has some interest in that. So I can ask him at that time. The EIR for Sites Reservoir was commented on by the agency. We had Alan Lilly review that and comment for us, and our concerns at that time were specifically what are the impacts to Term 91. They, in the EIR, if I remember correctly, have obligated themselves to pump water from Sacramento River into the reservoir when conditions permit. And they have
Interestingly, the piece today said it would only be taking water from naturally occurring sources draining into the Sites Reservoir, but that it would be filled, it had a high probability of filling just through those natural sources. So you're talking about diversion.
Yeah, they're pumping from the Sacramento River to the reservoir. They divert, I think, from the Sacramento River to a canal, then pump from the canal up to the reservoir. And their intent is to do it only when Term 91 is not triggered. Our concern specifically was, and it is in our comment letter, that would their pumping trigger Term 91 to extend longer or restart? If it ended and then we got a dry winter, could that trigger restarting, or would they stop pumping to allow that Term 91 not to go back into effect?
Well, I mean, you think of a huge reservoir as adding to water supply. So do you think it could have negative impacts on our district?
It could, yeah. Overall, it should be positive because it is more water supply that would be releasing into the river that should mitigate Term 91. But it also depends a bit on how and when they're doing the pumping. If it's a drier winter and they're pumping out, could that theoretically trigger Term 91? I don't know the answer to that, but it's a concern that we had.
Thank you.
Very interesting life and time to live in. Yeah.
Always keep an eye on your water, Skip.
Any other questions to Tim? Okay, now we're going to switch over to Stan, I believe, right? Thank you.
Correct. Tim, can you go ahead and you will have to flip it over if you don't mind. So just a quick update on the operations. Have a few things new, trying to limit what we've talked about before. But just current update, where, related to the Term 91, the plant right now is putting out roughly 21 million gallons a day. Would be normally a bit higher than that. Woodlands at 11, Davis and UC combined are around 9.7. Normally you'd see that higher. Again, with Term 91 and us having 10,000 acre feet as an agency, and the cities and UCD chopping that up amongst the assumed 5 months, that results in a lower maximum daily rate that we can draw. I think at least the two cities, UCD is still assessing it, but the two cities will vary that number month to month to try and keep the ratio of groundwater to surface water kind of consistent. UCD right now is at about 0.7 MGD a day from their normal 1.8, so they're seeing a significant, from a ratio perspective, significant difference in their flow. Met all the contract requirements. Happy to take questions on that, by the way. Met all contract requirements, no shutdowns or utility outages. All of the monthly water quality and diversions as normal are posted on the website. One thing of note that's new is Woodland. Tim has been discussing with the Jacobs staff potentially about mixing the solids that they have from the filters. We have backwash that goes out into a drying pond, and you have sediment you have to remove occasionally. Woodland's wastewater plant produces biosolids that has to be removed occasionally. The thought is if we mix those two together, it could result in a cost savings both to the agency and to Woodland from a disposal perspective. So Tim's looking into that, both for the city, and then potentially that may save the agency some dollars on the hauling of that sediment that we would normally haul to the landfill. Again, annual PM nearly complete. The one main update is the intake screen brush inspection was conducted by divers. We talked about that last time where we had planned to do that. That was done, I believe, last week actually. The brushes were actually found not to be contacting the screens. There was a loose bolt that the divers were able to fix, so that's been corrected. And then the screens, as you can see, they have a little bit of algae growth, but in general, not in bad shape. The brushes, depending on how long they had been not contacting it, they, not surprisingly, were in fantastic shape. So we'll see how they wear down now that they're actually contacting the screens. And then the picture to the right is, if you remember last year, we had the log boom actually came apart. The shackles actually corroded away, if you will, real quick. So we put on some different types to test them. The divers were able to take some pictures and inspect those. We'll get a full report of that, but that picture is of one of those types of shackles. There's some rust there, but in general, not in bad shape.
Isn't that a rather rapid failure? I
Yes.
mean, we're not talking salt water here. This is fresh.
No, there was, and that's definitely what was one of our concerns. Is in about a year we saw some significant corrosion, and so what we did is we put some different types of shackles on to test which ones held up the best, and then the plan forward is whichever is the best, that would be what we'd use moving forward. But actually, there's pictures of a couple different of the varieties, and they actually all of them look pretty good. So whatever was occurring before may have been a
Aberration.
short-term occurrence. Yeah, we're still pondering that.
Can you do me a favor and tell me what Jacobs is? Did Jacobs buy CH2M Hill, or is it a subcontractor?
Yeah, so that's so Jacobs, and so they have a number, and Dick can probably speak to this from a contract perspective, but Jacobs did purchase parts of CH2M, and so the operating wing of it that operates for us, they're changing all their logo and information to Jacobs, but if from a contract perspective, I believe it's still the CH2M entity that we actually technically contract with.
So much for design, build, operate.
Yes, the corporate entity that we have a contract with, CH2M Hill Engineers Incorporated, continues as a Delaware corporation. They continue to be the party to our contract. About a year ago, maybe a little less, that corporation, its majority of its stock was bought by this larger engineering company called Jacobs Engineering. So Jacobs Engineering now owns all or most of the shares of our contractor corporation. So it's essentially a wholly owned subsidiary of Jacobs.
Well, I'll just be interested to hear if there are any wrinkles arising out of this change.
Yeah, and I'll defer to staff on that. So far, I don't think there's been any hitches.
No, so same staff, same.
You just have a new logo on your jacket?
Pretty much, they have new hats and new shirts.
Okay.
Yeah, is what we've seen so far.
That's good.
So as mentioned before, it's not a new issue. The hydrocyclone, we had some concrete corrosion. That's going to be handled in the fall when our demands go down. We can take that offline to complete. There was an issue with one of Woodland's finished motors for their finished pump station. That's been corrected and it was installed on the 20th. That was the second install. The first time they had some issues when they tried to put it back in service and had to go back to the shop, came back, so it's working fine now. One new item, they did experience some plugging of the chemical lines, which is actually not uncommon for certain chemicals. Go ahead.
This has been working fine for 7 days. Is that the 7 days? It's been installed on the 20th, it's 27th. So
Yes.
your confidence is good that it's
It didn't go up in flames the time when they turned it on, so I think we're okay. Yeah, which is what happened the first time. So the chemical lines plugged, polymer, which is a very viscous material that's actually pretty common. They experienced that. I'll show you a picture here of that in a minute. So they flushed that system. They're also looking to develop a procedure, which is primarily routine flushing, and then possibly some capital modifications to make sure that they can put pipes in if they do experience plugging and they have to go in and physically remove them. Right now, those are buried, and they would like to put those in a pipe chase so that they can access them without getting heavy equipment out there. That's just an example of what the plugging looks like. It just essentially coats the inside of the line to a point where you have a difficulty moving the chemical solution. And then just a little bit about the O&M at the joint intake. Like I said, the blank screens for hoist access, again, not a new issue that we're looking at doing that in the fall. Most of the blanks have been moved over now to where the crane can get to them, but we still have to fabricate a long-term storage on that north side of the structure. And then, what the divers did find out was, from a standpoint of accessing the screen cleaner bearings, well, not the bearings, but the bearings in addition to the access of the screen cleaner and the brushes, the divers cannot repair or replace very much of that. So that we will still have to continue in finding a long-term solution to remove that from the water. And we are, and I believe there is some, we did ask for some funds in the budget to look at that. And then also noticed last time the seal lubrication for our raw water pumps. We mentioned last time they're water driven now. We did get a quote to change those over to oil lubed, and essentially it's the same, if not less cost to add another well to provide backup for that water. And this is a permanent solution versus what we were looking at before. So we did ask for that money in the budget as well, to the tune of about just under $100,000, I believe. And then we did get a quote to, again, with the screen cleaner pulley and replace existing wire, not new. Identified that last time. We did get a quote, and once we see demands drop, we will see about having them, Jacobs, go ahead and move forward with replacing that. Local city operations and UCD, again, kind of the same. Complaints in inspected range. We did not include, Woodland chose not to add a second polyphosphate corrosion inhibitor, so that money has been removed from the budget moving forward. That's before you here next. And then with Term 91 in effect, the ASR well injection that Woodland normally had been doing stopped, obviously, because they do not have the water supply to do that. And they're right now around 90% being delivered as surface water. For Davis, not necessarily a new issue, but we did have had a number of calls regarding bacterial growth on plumbing fixtures. So we're working with the water quality experts that the agency contracts with to see what we can do about that. Most likely, based on the initial evidence. Most likely it's legacy deposits of material in the distribution system, which we're going to be working with them to develop a flushing program and see if we can't improve that. And then right now, Davis is around 70% surface water, as opposed to roughly, usually at this time, we're probably 90% or better still.
What would be an example of somebody finding this on what plumbing fixture?
It varies amongst the plumbing fixtures, but it's essentially a black slime growth, either coming from the faucet, in the tub, any of those fixtures that would have the water dripping. And usually what we found is if we just have them take the aerator off and bleach and clean, and in very few instances it hasn't come back. So it's more of a cleaning there, but we did do some testing back at the meters, and we did find some residual there as well. So definitely there's some distribution system work we can do to maybe improve that. And then UCD has not exhibited any significant issues with their introduction. Although on the operations side, because they're down at 0.7 or 700,000 gallons a day, their pump station has, because of the way that the pump station works, when that shuts off, it does impact Davis's operations to a pretty good degree. So our teams have been working together to minimize that effort. Yeah. Questions?
Questions? Thank you. Thank you very, very much. So we'll move on at this time to item number 4, considering improving the budget.
Yes, I have a brief presentation on the budget as well. And then we can stop at a few points and take questions if you want to from either Stan or myself. Overall, the capital, we have three real components of the overall budget. One of them is a capital project. We are still working on completing the work at the joint intake. The second component is operation and maintenance. The majority of the cost for O&M costs is obviously related to the operation, paying the monthly service fees to CH and electricity and chemicals, and then also O&M oversight on the agency side of things. And then the biggest cost component on its own is the SRF repayments. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on those coming up. On the capital side of things, we have just under $1 million to complete the capital project. And then with the regional operating budget, which is inclusive of everything, is about $19.19 million for a total budget this year of $20.12 million. Going forward, the next few years after this, the capital project will go away. Regional operating budget may go down slightly as we go forward. This is kind of a quick overview, more related to the capital side of things. Joint intake construction, about $885,000 or so remaining to complete that work in the next fiscal year. That will change a little bit depending on exactly what does the June pay request look like, how much work did they complete through the end of June, and then what's remaining to do after that. So that may change slightly. That's our best estimate at this time. And then about $10,000 in agency administration and $28,000 in program management to help make sure that happens, for a total cost of $923,000. Under the major capital, I kind of covered this a little bit already, but a little bit more detail on that, what's all included: construction engineering, construction management, and then grant closeout. And then agency administration is mainly in the legal side of things. And then program management, cost reconciliation. When we get our final reimbursement from Bureau of Reclamation, we can finally do our reconciliation on the grant overall. This is a bit of a comparison between capital costs, comparison between this year budget, this year expenditure to date, and then next year's budget, and the difference between the two. And this is a little bit, in a way, misleading because we're in the middle of the last capital project right now. So that does show a reduction of about $716,000 overall. However, that's just showing that we've built more than half the project already. So I don't know if there's any questions on that, if you want me to go to any detail on those items specifically. On capital cost side of things, some of the things that are reduced, about $140,000 reduction due to things that just don't apply this next fiscal year. We're expecting to be about 60% complete through the end of June, so the remaining 40% is next fiscal year. And then again, we're waiting for our last $264,000 in federal funding. The schedule to that is not known. Under the operating budget, there's a couple of major considerations. One of them is the O&M, which is the fixed and variable costs related to running a water treatment plant. Majority of that is the fixed fee that we pay to CH or Jacobs on the O&M side of things. And that actually is a little bit higher this year because the water projection, the total water demand projections are higher than they were last year, largely due to this next winter projection that Woodland will fully maximize their injection to the ASR wells. So it is projected to be higher over this past fiscal year. Electricity and pass-through chemicals are a bit lower. The reason for that is we are, for the first time in this budget, being able to use actual numbers to plan ahead. Because we've had our first full year completely operating the plant, so we're now able to go from theoretical numbers for electricity and chemicals to actual. So we're able to refine those numbers much closer than we have in the past. And then, of course, there's state-related fees to operate the plant itself, and then we do have a contingency to cover anything that may be unknown at this time. O&M oversight is about $374,000. That is quite a bit reduced from the past. Relates to service contracts related to operations period with RD 2035. There's certain things we work on with them. Joint intake electricity reconciliations. We are on a combined electric bill with the joint intake. We have WAPA power over there, so it's substantially lower cost for electricity, but because of that, we have to essentially split the electric bill every month. So there's some effort going into making sure that everybody pays the correct portion of that. And then we're near finished with the fish refugia study. The final report is coming out this week. And so that's what was a cost in the past fiscal year that has not been carried forward. There is a reduction, but still a budget item for distribution system coordination and testing. In past years, it was primarily in the Woodland side. This year is primarily on the Davis side of things. But overall, it is a lower dollar amount than we've seen in the past. We have about $197,000 in the proposed budget today for permits and water supply, and the majority of that, $150,000 of that, is a budget that we actually added. This is new since the draft budget that you saw earlier. This is related to the agency funding studies related to a supplemental water purchase. It's a little bit of a guess as to exactly how much it costs, but we do know that it's very difficult to do a CEQA amendment, which would be an amendment to the agency's EIR and a water conveyance study in the Sacramento River system. There's no way that those studies happen less than $50,000 each. So we're thinking $150,000 is a good number to use for covering the cost of those studies. And then agency administration, again, this is a bit lower than the past. That covers all the GM services, operation services, engineering services, legal counsel, and those type of things. And also, actually, this is a bit higher. I misspoke. This is a bit higher before because we included property taxes this time. Where in last year's budget, we did not have property taxes included. The largest single item itself is the debt service, of course. That's about $10.6 million between Woodland and Davis. Woodland does fund a reserve payment for the first 10 years. Davis paid their reserve fully up front, so there's not one for Davis, it is only for Woodland. Woodland's SRF payments now annually, these are the final numbers going forward, about $6.16 million for Woodland and $3.827 for Davis. The loan amounts aren't too different, but the main difference between the two cities is that Woodland's note is a 20-year and Davis is a 30-year, so the principal and interest payments for Davis are a little bit lower. This is a kind of a quick comparison on kind of a high level between 17-18 budget, 17-18 expenditures, and then what's planned for 18-19, and then the difference between the two. For the most part, the first couple items, O&M and O&M oversight are reduced by a few $100,000 since the past year. Permits and water supply are higher. That one's higher because of the budget we included for studies related to supplemental water purchase. Agency administration is only higher because we added $200,000 for taxes. Otherwise, it would have been slightly lower. And then the SRF amounts below, again, are the actual final amounts that we have. This is kind of a little bit more detail. I kind of covered about half of this already. Operations cost is a little bit lower, mainly because chemical costs are reduced. We are using actual costs this time rather than theoretical. And Woodland did remove the polyphosphate costs. I think that was about a $160,000 budget item alone last year. That's gone. Power costs are down. Electricity costs are down again because we're using actuals now for the first time. And O&M oversight is reduced. Fishery studies are completed. There were two studies. We had to do a refugia study and then also a separate fishery study that UC Davis put together. Those are now done. a reduction in distribution system monitoring, testing and monitoring, and also a reduction in engineering support. That's about half what it was.
Did we buy the phosphate last year?
No, we did not.
Okay.
We put it in the budget. We bought the equipment. We had authorization to buy the SCADA, but we did not buy the SCADA, and we did not buy the chemical.
Okay.
We were seeing a lot of water quality complaints, and that was kind of the next level to try to
Right.
really aggressively deal with it. But part of our team was also saying, just wait, time will work things out.
Can we liquidate the equipment, or are we just going to keep it around?
The equipment itself wasn't that expensive, and it is the same pumps that we use for chlorine. So basically now they have spares.
Thank you.
A couple of things that are a little bit higher this year. Water supply increased cost by about $150,000 to cover that. And that's really related to the supplemental studies for water purchasing. And agency admin costs overall down about increased by about 25%, sorry, primarily due to property taxes. We have to continually pay our permits to the state. Those are included in there. And then we have our final SRF payments for the SRF included. Overall revenue picture looks similar to this. Woodland overall will pay roughly $10.6 million, Davis $7.7 million, UC Davis around $400,000, RD 2035 a little over $200,000, and the Bureau of Reclamation their final $264,000, which matches those totals match our overall budget request, minus the capital project. Any questions on anything I've covered so far? Okay, sorry.
I'm just going to bring up a subject that's been on my mind for a long time, and that is, I believe there should be director compensation for coming to these meetings. Our government has changed a great deal over the years. It's not for myself, but we're all temporary, and there'll be others that come after us. We have young council members who have other jobs, places they have to be. It's hard for them to even take an assignment like this, let alone suffer the consequences in their employment. I feel we already have assignments at our councils that do bring an honorarium, and I think it's only fair. Every one of these, if you look at the path of our government, JPAs almost didn't exist more than 20 years ago, and so we now have VCEA, we now have this, we still have SACOG with the airport, the transportation district, all of these things, the housing authority. It's a fairly long list, and it's a demanding thing. I feel when we organize these things, we should have an honorarium for each person who comes to one of these meetings. To me, it's only fair. The compensation we receive from our cities is fairly modest, far more modest than ours than some, but I do believe it's only right. And we only meet 4 times a year, but we've still got to take these agendas, study them, come here, sit through, and make these difficult decisions in some cases. So that's my recommendation, is that we direct our staff to figure a path towards doing something like that. I'm also wondering how we're going to get some of our colleagues to even take these assignments, given the demands of them, without any kind of remuneration. So that's my spiel, and I'm going to be saying it at VCA too, because I believe it's only fair.
Let us maybe add that to the agenda at our next meeting for that discussion. Is that something that
Maybe staff can work on
we
it.
can do that and come back and we have a full discussion of that item, and we could. Our next president can work with the staff here and guide that discussion a little bit during our next meeting.
Thank you, Skip.
Thank you.
Brett, do you want to weigh in on it?
Yeah.
I mean, you're a guy still working for a living, aren't you?
I guess I would say that it's not to bring back necessarily the way forward, a way forward, but to explore the issue, whether we want to do something like that or not, as opposed to.
I think if you ought to say so, you ought to declare yourself now to the staff if we're going to ask them to do the work, if you don't agree with the idea.
Well, no, I think I guess.
Devil's in the details, I get that.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say from me personally that's a foregone conclusion that we would want to do non-honorarium. I guess I'd be curious more about the mechanics that they would suggest, and my supposition would be that as 4 reasonable people or 5 reasonable people, we would be open to the idea.
I don't know if it necessarily needs to apply to the university, but is this part of your job description and assignment?
I was going to say, I would be fairly sure that this would be something no member of the university would be able to accept, because we're here as part of our job duties.
Exactly.
I guess I mean, this agenda item is broad enough, talking about the budget for next year,
Right.
that, we probably can have that, a little bit of discussion for staff to see kind of where we are. I know that when I was on an alternate for Yolo County Housing, there was an honorarium, and it was kind of nice. I suppose it did not break the budget of that organization. So I would be open to the idea.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, we're going to direct staff, I guess, to explore it and bring it back at a future meeting. I think that's the consensus here.
I think we have direction. I think we're fine. Yeah.
I do have another completely unrelated question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was just
Okay,
a timeout.
Yeah.
You had a question. We
Yeah,
answered that question. You had a comment, and so we need to move forward.
No, I need to ask a question. It's
Yes, sir, you
unrelated.
have a question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I apologize that we're a few slides ahead of where I am, but when I'm looking at the capital cost comparison, there's a lot of, this is number 6, page 6. Oh yeah, you already brought it up. Good job.
Thanks.
There's a number of items that have been reduced to 0.
Yes.
Can you maybe go into just a little bit of detail on why some of those are able to be reduced completely?
Yes. The agency SRF loan assistance line item is 0 this time because this project is being funded directly from cash. So there is no SRF component for this work, for this project, so there's no work for them on that. Similarly with grant reimbursement closeout, we are simply waiting for our check to come. We have no more work at this time to do, other than call Washington and ask them to send it to us a few times. That doesn't cost much money. But the other things are SWIPI, QSP, and SWIPI compliance, and then the other ones are O&M manual review has been completed, and also bidding, joint intake, front-end spec bidding. Those items were one-time things to get the project out to bid and into construction, and now that we're into construction, they're no longer applicable going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Tim? You want to go forward, Tim?
I did have last couple of quick slides. These are pretty straightforward. So this is last year's slide on total project dollars to date. Total regional costs are $199.46 million a year ago. Today we're at 205.57. This is more on the construction side of things, and all of this was on the joint intake side of things, not on the water treatment plant side of things. You can see from last year to this year, the joint intake side today is 25.17 million. Construction, it was 19.05 million last year, and that's related to the finalizing of the cost for that project and also part of this year's project.
So it's basically right about 200 million for the whole thing.
Yes. Yep. So there's 2 recommended board actions. One of them is to adopt the 18-19 budget, and then also approve the associated consulting contracts. Well, we do have a separate item later to the consulting contracts. I think this includes legal, and that may be about it.
I'll move the budget.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the 18-19 budget as presented. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, good work.
Let me get to the right page here. Consider approval of operations period service contract amendment with CH2M Hill. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. General Manager asked me to brief the board for this item. There are 2 service contract amendments being brought to the directors for recommended approval. The first one, amendment number 12, is essentially a no-cost change order. The current contract provides an annual financial analysis reconciliation process comparing actual electricity costs to some maximum differences, and to then make credit or debit adjustments between CH2M Hill and the agency depending on where those numbers came in. And staff explained to me that it's a very convoluted, expensive process that moves a few dollars one way or the other, and the exercise, frankly, is not worth the scope of the effort, is not worth the credit or the debit at the end of the process. So staff's recommending, and CH2M Hill concurs, that we delete that process. We still calculate the electricity costs. We've got that measure and the proposed amendment. That's before you would have a reopener in the event that electricity cost usage exceed some reasonableness standard. But staff's recommending these text changes to the service contract that's before you to avoid having to go through the annual exercise that's not worth it. So let me pause that. That's Amendment 12, and let me pause there, see if there's any questions. Yep.
Not to do with the fit up, which I think makes a lot of sense. Is the electricity here, this is not WAPA, right? This is PG&E?
Yes, the water treatment plant's on PG&E power.
Is it going to the community choice aggregation?
Yes.
Okay.
But we did also apply for WAPA power. We submitted an application to WAPA power about a month ago for service starting in 2025. It's interesting that we have to apply 7 years ahead. WAPA power would be roughly 41% less expensive than PG&E. So we're interested in that, but I have no idea when they will let us know if we're in or not. I think on their end, they have to look to see can they provide enough power for us. The other part of that equation is that we would like to have our own electricity bill at the joint intake to stop having to split the bill. So we applied for both things, and we have not heard anything back yet from them.
So can we have we do have a recommendation in front of us. Is there any concern about that? Can we have a motion?
I'll move, what's the approval of the service contract amendments number 12 and 13.
Do I have a second?
Sure, I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second as requested. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Move on to item 6. Oh, 5B, there it is. Yes, I'm sorry, 5B. Tim Bush.
Well, I'll cover 5B briefly. It was included in the motion the board just approved, but 5B is change order, service contract amendment number 13. This is a cost change order. It was referenced briefly in Stan's staff report, basically shifting from this water-based seal system to an oil-based seal system that's going to be much better and lower operational hassle for the cost of $94,000, and it's in the budget, and staff recommends approval, which I understood was included in the prior motion.
That was the intention, yes.
That was the intention.
Can we just specifically mention Amendment 12?
Yeah.
I said 12 and 13.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I got over my
didn't
skis
realize
a little
that.
bit. My apologies.
Is everybody comfortable that we have 12 and 13 covered here?
I
think
am. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
I misheard.
I'm not sure sometimes.
Those were all water seal
Okay,
pumps.
let's go on to item number 6A, and that is approval of 1819 task orders, consultant contracts.
I don't even know why that was not consent.
So there's two of them before you today. One of them is Westio's contract amendment for continuing engineering services to the agency. Their cost is roughly half what it had been in past years, because now we're moving more to a purely operational mode rather than construction, financing, working out the final things. So it's a little over $500,000 if I remember correctly, but it's roughly half what we spent in past years. And I would expect going forward, there are still a few things we need to complete, reconciliation and cost for the joint intake, and a few other things that we're working on, that after those are completed, I expect in future years that to drop even further. But we've had a very good working relationship with Westios. They're very responsive for the agency and everything we need. They helped us change some slides right before the meeting, even though they're mostly on vacation this week. So I recommend approving their contract. The second one is with Kim Floyd Communications. That's more for public outreach. It's a pretty small dollar amount. It's more related to things we need to do to update our website. There's periodic things we need to add to our website. She does that for us, and anything else we may need. Right now, we don't have anything really planned other than we are discussing a video tour of the water treatment plant to make. We have a lot of tours at the water treatment plant, and some people do not really have the ability to walk around the entire plant site. So we're contemplating the idea of having a video prepared that if somebody can't walk, they could watch the video instead. And that's something that she may be working on for us, but it's not quite solidified yet.
You have a recommendation to move task order number 11 and task order number 7 Do I have a motion?
Could I have ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Please, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
On the West Teos contract, is that essentially billed for hourly, and we pay certain hourly amounts for certain engineers and that kind of thing?
Yes, yes, they only bill us for what they work on specific tasks.
Because I saw this task order 12 thing. Is it actually going to be $537,000?
We were hoping, that's the maximum that they can spend. So it's time and material. So as they spend time on items, they bill us for that. As it usually goes, some of the individual items will go over and some of them will go under.
Right.
But the expectation is they cannot go over that. What we've seen in the last fiscal year, they spent quite a bit less than what their authorization was. Okay. And our expectation is that will be how things are going forward.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I'm sorry.
Are we voting on both of them?
Yeah, is it all right if we do both of them one time? Yes.
So it's 6A and B. So I'll move staff recommendations in 6A and B.
Second.
Been moved and seconded with regards to items 6A and 6B, task orders 7 and task orders 11. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you. Move on to... Yes, ma'am.
Skip, can I just add one thing in support of... I want to support, as a board member, the idea of creating this video tour to create accessibility. I think that's a great move for people who are not able to physically walk the site. So, just
okay, thank you. Yeah, we have been working on it. The first person we asked is not available to do that due to workload, and we're kind of working through logistics on that now. But it's something we are planning on doing.
I think the tour of the plant, but also the whole concept, is significant to understand and could be placed at the website or something. Is this, people go by and you look down there and they say, "What is that?" And how far that travels, and in the plant that we outside of Woodland, etc. So I think I support that as well. Yes, thank you. Any further comments or questions? Okay, let us move on to consider election of board chair and vice chair for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2018.
I move that Brett Lee be our new chair.
Second.
I guess we need to conduct an election, right?
Sorry, Skip.
All those in favor of Mr. Lee becoming the new chair for this organization for
the
the
suspense is killing him.
July 2018, signify by saying yes or aye. Aye.
Yes.
You don't get to vote. You don't get to vote. You're done. And then I'd like to nominate Mr. Stollard as the vice chair.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that Mr. Stollard become the vice chair. He does not get to vote either. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Very good.
He accepts though, right?
He does accept, yes. He does.
Humbly.
With pleasure.
Thank you. And let us look on now to the long-range board calendar, please.
Yes.
This is obviously the appropriate time to mention what Tom had brought up about exploring the honorarium for board members. Mm-hmm. Just putting it out there since now's the time.
And so we will do that on at our next quarterly meeting, correct? Talk a little bit about that? Thank you.
And UC Davis would like to, if this is an appropriate time, to request that we also add on the membership consideration for UC Davis in the agency.
Yeah, I was hoping we'd be through this tax issue. I don't know whether that would affect the conversation or not. And Tim asked me if, because it was an idea that we would talk about it again this time. So I said, well, let's wait, and hopefully we'll be through the tax issue, but that would be perfectly fine to put it on the agenda for discussion.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other comments on the long-range calendar, ladies, gentlemen? Okay.
One quick thing, we do have a request for potentially looking at a different date. Right now it's scheduled for September 20th. We may be sending out a request for changing the date in the near future, either slightly before that date, if that works out for everybody.
September 20th?
Right now it's scheduled for September 20th, but we do have a request to move it a little bit earlier than that. So we'll send an email out to see what availability is for the week before that, or right around the week before that.
Okay, number 9, technical advisory comments. We get through that real quick. Board member comments?
I'll add in something that Stan brought up that I think is fun for everyone to know. We have at UC Davis, through Global Affairs, a program that's called the Mandela Fellows. These are young leaders from Africa that come over. This will be the third year that they've come over. It's about 30 to 40 folks that come over, and the past 2 years have been focused on energy. This year's focused on public policy, really, and the good news that's pertinent to this group is that on July 24th, I think I have that date right, they're going to be taking a tour of the plant and learning all about, they'll have a presentation from Dennis, they'll get to actually physically walk around the plant. And again, I think this is a great opportunity for us to share an important example of water collaboration, since those stories, there are not enough good water collaboration stories.
Any further comments? So you get to adjourn the meeting, Mr.
I thought it took effect anyway later. But anyway, if there's no further comments, we'll adjourn the meeting.
Oh, my goodness.
Fantastic.